All right, hello everyone, welcome back. I want to do something a little bit different this time. Most of my material is about various historical events, but this is kind of how we do history. This story of what is primary and secondary sources. I want to kind of explain these terms and explain how we use them in history. This is something I cover with all my students the first day of class, and it's something that's very helpful if anybody's out there, hear these terms, you're studying history anywhere else. What do these terms mean? Sometimes I ask my students, they go, is the primary one we use more in the class? And it's like, no, it's not that. So a primary source is a document that is written at the time from the direct source, right, from that time period. A secondary source is something that's written after the fact. So for example, a primary source, if I'm talking about ancient history, might be a letter from a Roman emperor. That is a primary source. Somebody years later, centuries later, today writing about that Roman emperor is a secondary source. Or another example of a primary source might be something like a document like Magna Carta or the Declaration of Independence. Or if you're talking about, like the period of Napoleon, maybe we have a diary of Napoleon, an entry from Napoleon's diary. That's a primary source. Somebody later writing about Napoleon is a secondary source. So that's what they are. Now, the next question is which is better to use when we study history? And very often students say, well, primary sources. And I go, why? And they go, well, because it's a first-hand account. But of course, there's always a problem with primary sources. And the key problem with primary sources is primary sources can have biases, right? There's an old saying, history is written by the victors. And now, is that necessarily true? Well, part of what we do when we study history is you have to go through those sources and find those biases. I promise you, no Roman emperor ever sat around saying, man, I'm this evil guy who murdered all these Christians and Jews. But we know a lot of them were pretty horrible. So you have to not rely solely on a primary source, right? And you have to understand, like, what is the bias? Where is this perspective coming from? There's one really good one I use in my courses by a man named Einhard. And Einhard writes this biography of Charlemagne. He paints Charlemagne as this great guy, but then you later find out he was his friend. And so you understand that, and then you can kind of work through that source a little bit more. Now, a secondary source, well, don't those have biases? And the answer is yeah, a secondary source can also have a bias. So if a secondary source has a bias, what use is it in history? And the answer to that is it gives you hindsight, and there's one thing you can never get from a primary source. You can never know the impacts of an event. How do you know the impacts of an event? Because some of the impacts come 20, 30, 50 years, hundreds of years later. So a secondary source allows us to kind of group things together, see things from a maybe less emotional perspective. But the primary source does give you that. For example, primary sources are mandatory. If you're studying World War I and you watch my World War I lectures, I use a lot of primary sources there because it captures the emotions and the feelings of people in trench warfare. You don't have that from a secondary source. It's a lot harder to get that. But then you get from the secondary source, well, these were all the impacts of World War I. So I hope that's clear. Just something quick I wanted to record for you all, and it's something you could just use as you're studying history or studying a lot of other things. And hopefully you could use this as you're watching any of my lectures. And of course, I have a ton of other material up about all sorts of great stuff. So feel free to watch. I did a couple other little videos, just kind of basic understanding. I have one on dating systems. I'll link here if you haven't seen that one. Some students like, how do I understand BC and AD? So I have a quick little video on that. How to do Roman numerals, because those come up very often in history. So I do have a few things, just how to do history type things versus all my lecture material, which is the bulk of my lectures up here. All right, hope that's clear. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching, and please feel free to share. All right, have a great day, everyone.